Hello, and welcome back to Chapter 4 of the Assassination Simulation. My name is Tess, I'm the author, and I'm so excited you're here. One quick note before we begin. This chapter does contain discussions of mental health and allusions to suicidal thoughts, so please take that into account before listening. Thank you so much. Chapter 4. Myra guided Evie into the medbay and introduced her to Vor, the ship's medic. After the brief introduction, she gave Evie a last smile and left. The medical bay resembled what Evie had seen of the rest of the ship. This made the 3 large black cylinders positioned at the room's center stand out, though she thought they would have anyways. They were tall, reaching up to just below the room's ceiling. Each was open on one side, revealing a dark, unpleasant interior. "Evie, welcome aboard," Vor said. This Scanarian was male, if his deeper voice was any indicator. He walked up to one of the cylinders, gesturing, and she realized he wanted her to step into the cramped interior. She didn't move. She wasn't afraid of confined spaces, but this one looked particularly coffin-like and unwelcoming. "Don't worry," Vor said, smiling. "I know they look awful. We have tried to explain that to the sniffers, but they insist that a design change would affect the function. I assure you, resurrection chambers may not look great, but they are perfectly safe." "This is a resurrection chamber?" Evie asked, curious, eyeing the intimidating structure with more interest. "I'm, not dead. Also, I thought I didn't get access to sniffer tech, because I'm not a member of the Understanding." Vor chuckled. "How observant, my dear. Resurrection chambers are a bit of a misnomer. They can diagnose and fix most problems, including the more extreme ones. They are the best and most efficient medical tool we have, and are widely used throughout the Understanding, treating everything from colds to crushed skulls. You are correct about not having access once you're in the sim, but we get some flexibility during your training. It's no fun for the audience watching someone compete if they are suffering from a debilitating chronic illness. We can fix you guys up and treat any injuries you get until you begin your time in the sim." Evie nodded and hesitantly took a step into the dark interior. Cautious, she ran a finger down one of the dark leathery walls and felt it ripple as if in response to her touch. Shivering with revulsion, she turned around to see Vor's empathetic face, right as the contraption snapped closed. The walls pressed in around her. She opened her mouth to scream as the world around her dissolved into nothingness. Evie's eyes snapped open. It was nothing like waking up normally. She went from complete unconsciousness to an abrupt state of total awareness, with no groggy transition. She was inside the chamber, but the door had reopened and she quickly stumbled out. "Welcome back," said Vor, who sat nearby in a desk-like cubby, monitoring something. "How are you feeling?" Evie didn't respond at first. She felt odd. She bounced up and down on the soles of her feet, stretching her perpetually stiff neck and back like she always did after waking. Except they weren't stiff. All of her normal aches and tensions were gone. The change wasn't just physical. She felt light, as if weights she hadn't realized were there had been removed from her shoulders and chest. Her mind felt impossibly sharp, like she could think clearly for the first time in a long time. "I have your results," Vor continued. "Overall, you are in excellent health, which is a bummer. If you had a more serious medical issue, we could have taken care of it. Unfortunately, you look good, which means you will probably get them later in life and have to rely on human healthcare. Tough luck." Evie stared at him. Then, suddenly, she started to laugh. A genuine, full-body laugh, much more than the joke deserved. It surprised her. Since Mildred's disappearance, laughing was something she had done less and less frequently. But that hadn't always been the case. She had memories of her life before the loss of her sister. She had always had an easy laugh, an easy smile. And suddenly, she understood what this strange, light feeling was. She felt normal. Her grief, her anger were still there, but they were no longer a constant, looming presence threatening to consume her. "We did find a few minor concerns," Vor said. You had some scar tissue around your left elbow that was restricting the joint's mobility. Looked like an old injury that healed incorrectly. You also had some fascial adhesions in your back, along with a bunch of minor tension spots all over your body. I have never met a human who didn't have those, though. Finally, you had some chemical imbalances in your brain. Those are also common, but your case was definitely more severe than average. We went ahead and cleared all those up for you. You should be feeling pretty good. The last diagnosis sobered Evie. The injury to her elbow had happened about 10 years ago when she had first gotten into kendo. It had always been a little stiff, along with her neck and back. The chemical imbalance, however, was something that she had been avoiding. A few months after Mildred's disappearance, she had briefly seen a therapist. The therapist had done her best to help Evie and had tried to suggest treatments. Evie had been in denial, entirely consumed with her frantic search for her sister. She had refused to hear the well-meaning words that gently told her it was a lost cause, that she needed to accept her loss, let herself grieve, and move on. She had stopped going and never went to get the medications. After 6 months, the COVID pandemic abruptly ended her search, and she had no choice but to return home. She took a remote translation job to help distract her and to replenish her diminished resources. That job had led to the offer in Singapore once the lockdowns had lifted. By then, she had accepted reality. It had been a year and a half with no sign, no word. She still couldn't fully believe her sister was dead, but she had stopped looking. To distract herself, she buried herself in her work, always the first through the door and the last to leave. Any remaining free time was filled with teaching kendo classes and going to the gym. Every time she sat still, her anger and sadness would overwhelm her. She hadn't realized that something had actually changed in her brain, but now, with this new clarity she was feeling, it was obvious. The last 3 years felt like a blurry, painful dream. You fixed everything. Just like that, Evie asked, returning to the present. Welcome to the understanding, Vor replied, smiling. Just don't get used to it. We also added an injection of vitamin B and a little caffeine to boost you for the rest of the day. When you're ready, I'm supposed to take you down to the training center for a physical evaluation. The Scanarian stood and walked over to Evie. As Evie looked at the creature, she felt an unexpected wave of gratitude swell through her. She reached forward, taking his hand and squeezing, hoping he would understand the gesture. His hand was just as cold as Myra's had been. His expression turned to one of confusion, but he didn't pull away. To her surprise, she felt tears sliding down her face. Thank you, she said. I hadn't realized how bad it was, how much of myself I had lost. I don't really know what to think about being here, but I can see now how much worse the alternative would have been. He relaxed, placing his other hand on hers and squeezing. He looked at her with empathy, waiting patiently as she cried. It felt wonderful. She hadn't truly been interested in the assassination simulation before this. She was here for her sister. That hadn't changed, but now she felt like she owed these strange but familiar people her gratitude. If it weren't for them, she would be in prison, ostracized, removed from her distractions. She wouldn't have been able to deal with the stillness. It wouldn't have been long before she would have turned to a more permanent solution. The Scanarians had given her life back to her. Given it back, only to potentially take it away again. With her new clarity came the sudden, and for the first time complete realization of what she had signed up for. She was here to risk her life for their entertainment. Before this, that hadn't seemed to matter. It was an easy trade. But now, she was suddenly filled to the brim with the feeling of being alive, and she wasn't so eager to give that up. But even with the risks, being here was still better than the alternative. If the last few years had given Evie anything, it was the ability to compartmentalize. She took her newfound reservations about her current situation and tucked them away. All she could do was buckle down and make sure she did well. For her sister, for the Scanarians, and for herself. Some time passed, and the tears slowed and stopped. She wiped her eyes, feeling just a little embarrassed, though Vor didn't seem to mind. "Thank you," she said for a final time. "You're welcome, Evie. Maybe I was wrong before about you not having anything serious to fix," Vor said affectionately. "If you're ready, we can get going to the training space, where you will meet your instructor for all the physical skills you will need to learn over the next several months." Evie nodded and followed him back into the hallway. The training space was a little distance from the medbay, which gave Evie a chance to see more of the ship. It seemed mostly comprised of narrow, winding hallways full of frequent doorways leading to various rooms. None of the doorways had doors, and as she walked by, she saw that many of the rooms were full of Scanarians going about different tasks. There was one exception. Halfway between the medical bay and the training space was a large double door. As they passed, even from a few feet away, Evie could feel the heat radiating out. "Where does that go?" she asked Vor, curious. "That leads to most of the ship. To the Scanarian section. Our native atmosphere is much warmer than yours. We are most comfortable around 112 degrees Fahrenheit with 100% humidity. Obviously, that is not an atmosphere that humans thrive in, so we tone this part of the ship down." "Really?" Evie asked, surprised. "Doesn't that make this section of the ship uncomfortable for you?" He laughed. "Yes, but that's why we wear these horrible things." He picked at the clothing he was wearing, which was identical to that worn by every other Scanarian she had seen, except Azur. "Normally, we don't bother with clothes, but out here, we have to wear these. They're heated, and they keep our core temperatures from dropping too much. We also put on lots and lots of moisturizer." Evie laughed. She had forgotten how good laughing could feel. "This side of the ship actually replaces the average Honrad atmosphere, the planet where you're headed," Vor explained. "The nitrogen and oxygen levels are slightly different, and the gravity is lower, though not enough for you to notice. We want to make sure that all three of you are well adjusted before you get on planet. The temperatures and humidity are very similar to Earth, which is one reason we have a lot of human assassins this season." "Wait," Evie stopped in her tracks. "All three of us? It's not just me." "No, I thought you knew. We picked up you and 2 other new assassins from Earth this time around. You'll meet them before too long, I'm sure." Before Evie had time to think about this, they stopped in front of another doorway, this one leading into a larger space. Vor reached down and gave her shoulder a squeeze. "Please come and visit if you need a tune-up," he said. "Training is going to be physically demanding, and you should take advantage of the sniffer tech as long as you can." Then, with a parting smile, he turned and left. Evie entered a large space with a high roof. Everything inside still seemed to grow out of the surrounding ship, but she could recognize what looked like exercise equipment and what had to be an obstacle course hanging from the ceiling. Before she could process any of it, her eyes locked onto something else. Onto the large, padded mat proudly positioned at the room's center. She knew what it was immediately, and was hit with a sudden, unexpected tidal wave of longing. It was a sparring mat. Through Evie's life, kendo had become a passion that was as much a part of her as breathing, until she had had to repress it, because it was too irreversibly linked with Mildred. She had kept in shape by teaching classes at a local dojo, and she could handle performing solo forms and drills. However, actually sparring brought up too many painful memories. Now, with this new freedom, she could feel the old passion burning inside of her, begging to be let out. She wanted nothing more than to run onto the mat and lose herself in a struggle with a worthy opponent. A new Scanarian walked up to Evie. This individual was more heavily muscled than the others, although still very slim. They moved like an athlete, with a confident, balanced gait that Evie recognized, even though they were different species. Evie knew she had once looked like that, moved like that. Her longing burned hotter. "Evie, it's nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you over the last day. Azur is very excited about your participation, And I'm interested to see if you live up to the hype. The Scanarian had a deep, feminine voice. She reached out her hand for a friendly shake. My name is Claro. I'll be working with you on your physical fitness and combat. Evie felt a shit-eating grin spread across her face. Her eyes flicked from the woman to the mat. Claro, it's nice to meet you. I don't suppose you fence, do you? Evie raised an eyebrow, challenging the other woman. Claro examined Evie from head to foot, taking her time. I, unfortunately, do not. Azur mentioned you have experience in swordplay, something called kendo. I don't suppose that experience extends to hand? Her eyes twinkled, throwing the challenge back at Evie. Evie shrugged modestly. I studied kickboxing for a few years in college to supplement my kendo training, she said, trying to prevent her excitement from being too obvious. Her focus had always been kendo, but kickboxing had come easily to her. It used a lot of the same skills. She had taken it pretty seriously, so much so that her instructor had tried to get her to switch sports. It had been a few years, but she was still confident she could hold her own. Excellent, responded Claro, nodding approvingly. Would you like to see what you remember? She gestured toward the mat. Evie had to fight to keep herself from running. Evie and Claro circled each other, the Scanarian adopting an unfamiliar but practiced stance. Evie couldn't keep a smile off her face, and her skin tingled with excited anticipation. She made the first move, lashing out with a kick. A kick that was deftly blocked by a lightning-quick arm from Claro, who then, seemingly without effort, knocked Evie off her feet with a hard palm to the chest. Evie grunted, the wind knocked out of her, but rolled aside in time to avoid Claro's downward punch. The blow had a little weight behind it, but not much. It would have hurt, but wouldn't have done any actual damage. This was what Evie had always loved about sparring. The point wasn't to hurt your opponent, but to outsmart them. It was more like a dance than a fight. Evie bounded to her feet, putting a little space between herself and Claro. The Scanarian was also smiling now. This time, Evie was more cautious. She looked at the way Claro moved, trying to read her intentions. It was the other woman who moved first this time, with a quick jab to Evie's ribs. She dodged it, barely, and managed to land a pretty good knee to Claro's thigh before the other woman hooked her around the ankle and once again threw her to the ground. Before Evie could roll away, Claro was on top of her, with a knee digging lightly into her stomach and a hand raised in a finishing blow that never fell. Evie couldn't remember the last time she had been this soundly bested. She was definitely out of shape, but she had a feeling that wouldn't have made a difference. Claro moved with an inhuman speed, which made a certain amount of sense. As she lay prone on the ground, Evie basked in a warm feeling of total contentment. It had been a long time since she had felt like this, like a student, eager to prove herself to her sensei. She was clearly outmatched, which meant she had a lot to learn. Her excitement left no room for other concerns about her situation. Claro stood and offered Evie a hand up. Not bad, but not great, though you clearly have experience, she said as she pulled Evie to her feet. The woman's expression took the sting out of her words. Lucky for you, we have time to work on it. You won't get your weapon back until the weapons ceremony, which is in about 2 months. That will give us plenty of time to work on basic hand-to-hand before we incorporate it. I think we should be able to make a lot of progress by then. My weapon? Evie asked. She remembered Azur had said something about a weapon too, but she hadn't gotten details. Ah, we haven't explained the rules of the assassination simulation yet, I presume. Evie shook her head. One of the main things we use to pick our assassins is their weapon. We can't give you anything to use for violence, for the same reason that we can't take part in the sim ourselves. So, each assassin brings their weapon with them, whatever you use to kill another member of your species. In your case, I believe Azur said it's an umbrella, which is frankly badass. Evie blinked in confusion. You want me to perform assassinations with Amelia? She asked, incredulous. If Claro had eyebrows, they would have gone up. Amelia. The umbrella? Is it normal for humans to name their inanimate objects? Evie felt her face growing red with embarrassment. The strength of the emotion caught her off guard. Not really. It's after the book character who inspired me to look for a self-defense umbrella. She uses a parasol. Never mind, it's not important. Claro looked amused, then thoughtful. She pulled a tablet out of a pocket in her uniform, quickly typed something into it, then slid it away. Anyway, technically we want you to perform assassinations with whatever makes sense in the moment. Anything you find or make on planet is yours to use. However, your weapon will be your unique advantage, and your most dangerous and valuable tool. Okay, then I don't understand why everyone is so excited, Evie said, confused. Wouldn't it make more sense to find an assassin with an actual weapon? I feel like a gun would be more useful than my umbrella. Claro smiled. Of course, when the sim first started, all the weapons were what you would expect, various types of firearms. However, it turns out those are very easy to defend against when you're expecting them. It didn't take long for everyone who qualified as a target to start wearing level 1 shields as a matter of common sense. Level 1 shields are inexpensive, and they stop all objects moving over a certain velocity. Just like that, guns were useless. It's become increasingly popular over the last several seasons to collect assassins with more, shall we say, interesting choices of weapon. You have nothing to worry about. Your umbrella has the potential to be one of the best weapons we have seen in years. This made no sense to Evie, but at the moment, it didn't matter. She was too full of energy, fueled by a passion she had long kept dormant, to care about the details of the sim right now. She took a step backwards, falling once again into a defensive stance. Okay, show me how you did that, how you put me on the ground the second time. A wide smile spread across Claro's face. They might have been different species, but it was clear they were kindred spirits. For the next few hours, they trained. By the time Claro declared they were done for the day, Evie was a panting, sweating mess. When offered water, she took it with a shaking hand. She felt amazing. Another Scanarian escorted her from the training center back to her room, where she showered and cleaned up. She emerged feeling tired, clean, and satisfied. Myra once again appeared, bringing her more of the porridge-like substance to eat. Don't worry, we will get you some solid food soon. Starting tomorrow, you'll be eating dinner with the 2 other assassins on board, eating Honrad food to accustom you all to it. The food is definitely the best thing to come out of that planet, lucky for you 3. Evie, drying her hair with a towel, jumped on the opportunity to ask about the others. Vor mentioned that I'm not the only one on board. Who are they? When will I be able to meet them? First thing tomorrow, Myra replied. Their names are Lubanzi and Haruto. We picked up Haruto about a week and a half ago. Lubanzi was a few days before you. You're our last replacement, so as soon as you got on board, we left for the Honrad home planet. What do you mean, replacement? Evie asked. Azur will explain all of that tomorrow, Myra responded. Tonight, and every night from now on, lights out is at hour 25. We're on Honrad time, so each day is 30 hours, and each hour is about 3/4 as long as what you're used to. Weeks are 5 days, and months are 6 weeks. You'll get used to it. Tomorrow, the wake-up chime sounds at hour 5, and you'll be expected in the training center at 5:30. Now I suggest you enjoy a little time to yourself and take advantage of your rest. Without another word, Myra exited the small room, letting the curtain fall back into place behind her. Evie took a half an hour to stretch out, trying to avoid being too sore the next day. She was looking forward to the training and meeting the other 2 humans. However, in the back of her mind was a small, itching worry about what sort of people they might be. The 2 other humans were like her. Murderers.